Alright, so this is the beginning of statistics, homework 1. This is a review of just some basic algebra things, so hopefully most of this stuff you already know. First one here, we're going to do the order of operations. So when we do the order of operations, normally we do parentheses, then exponents, multiplying and dividing from left to right, adding and subtracting from left to right. These first ones are not going to have any parentheses or exponents, so they're just worried about that you're doing the multiplying and dividing first and then the adding, subtracting second. Way back when, I used to remember that as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Now they call it Pemdas. Put it all together. But if I'm doing number 1 here following my order of operations, I am going to do the multiplying and the dividing from left to right. So first thing I'm going to do is the 3 times 9, which is 27. Minus the 12 divided by 2, which is 6, and then I'm going to add the 8. The adding and the subtracting, again, they say to go from left to right. 27 minus 6 is 21, plus 8 gives me 29 for my answer. So number 2 here, again, if I'm going to follow my order of operations, I have to do my multiplying and dividing from left to right. So if I'm going to do this one on my first step here, I have a division here, I have a multiplication here, I want to go from left to right. So I'm going to start with the 10 divided by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5, plus, I'm going to bring down that 8, plus, and then I'm going to do the 4 times the 7. 4 times 7, 28. Adding again from left to right, although you could add in any order. 5 plus 8 would be 13. 13 plus 28 gives me 41. Just ignore me. I didn't hit record yesterday, so I got 5 problems to record. I can crop in the middle. Number 3 here, if I follow my order of operations, I am going to do again my multiplying and dividing from left to right first. So here I have multiplying, here I have dividing. So starting with my 2 times 9, 2 times 9 is 18. Bring down my minus 3, and then I have a minus, and I'm going to do the 25 divided by 5, which is 5. Again, doing my adding and subtracting from left to right. 18 minus 3 would be 15. 15 minus 5 then should give me an answer of 10. So the next problems here, we're still doing our order of operations. Again, this time we have parentheses, so you do your parentheses, which includes your brackets, then your exponents if you have any, multiplying and dividing from left to right, adding and subtracting from left to right. So when you do the parentheses and you have more than one set of grouping symbols, you always want to start with the innermost set of grouping symbols. So in this case, we're going to start with the 18 minus 12. 18 minus 12 is 6. I'm going to bring down everything in my brackets and the divided by 9 on the end. In my brackets again, I have to remember my order of operations. So here I have to do my multiplying and dividing before I do my adding and subtracting. So I have to do the 7 times the 6 first. 7 times 6 is 42. So now I have 42 minus 15 divided by 9. I'm going to simplify inside my brackets again. 42 minus 15 looks like it's about 27. 27 divided by 9 then gives me an answer of 3. If you are using your calculator, you just use parentheses in place of the bracket. So I would put parentheses 7 times parentheses 18 minus 12, close my parenthesis, minus 15, close my parenthesis again, divided by 9. And the calculator would give you the answer if you wanted to check out, make sure you did the problem right. So next one, if I would be following my order of operations, I'm going to start with my innermost set of parentheses. 11 minus 9 would give me 2. So I would have 1 plus 2 times 4 in my brackets. I have the 45 divided by that answer once I'm done. Again, simplifying in my brackets, I have to follow my order of operations. I have to do multiplying and dividing before I add or subtract. So I'm going to multiply here. So I get 1 plus 8. I don't have enough room to write, but I'll squeeze it in there. 1 plus 8 is 9. So 45 divided by 9 going to give me 5 for my answer. Alright, so if you did this one here, you did the 15 plus 3, which was 18 first. So we have 2 plus 18 divided by 9 in my brackets. Then you had to do the division next. And so 18 divided by 9 was 2. So 2 plus 2 in my brackets give me 4. I can then take that times the 6 that was in front. And hopefully you all got an answer of 24, right? Okay. So order of operations. Next ones is just rounding or finding, first of all, finding the digits in my place value. If it ends in just a plain S, it's in front of the decimal. If it ends in THS, it's behind the decimal. I like to think about the ones behind the decimal. If I think about the word 100, 100 has 2 zeros. Since it has the THS, it's going to be 2 places after the decimal. So if you think about the number, the normal number, however many zeros it has, is how many places it will be after the decimal if you're not sure. Since there's not a ones place, we start with tenths. Tenths is 1 place, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. But if you're not sure, write the number 10,000. It's got 4 zeros. So it's 4 places after the decimal. So of course my ones place is in front of the decimal since it just ends in an S. The 3 is the digit that almost went where I wanted it to, in the 1 spot. My hundredths place, 2 zeros in 100, so 2 places after my decimal. 1, 2 makes the 7 in my hundredth spot. 10,000ths, again, if I write the word 10,000 or the number 10,000, it has 4 zeros, so I know it's going to be 4 places after my decimal. The 5 is going to be in the 10,000th spot. So if it's just a plain S, it should be in front of the decimal. THS, it should be after the decimal. So on number 8, what number is in your tens spot? The 5. Then we have the 10th spot. Whoops.
No, 0.
The 0. 0's in my 10th spot. And then the 10,000th spot.
4.
The 4. Exactly. So while I'm moving the board, go ahead, try number 9. Now I did notice on the statistics program a lot of them will say round it to at least the 100th spot or at least 2 decimal places. So if you carry your answer out farther than that, you're going to be okay. Just don't want to go shorter than what they tell you to do. So number 9 here, what number is in my 100 spot?
8.
The 8. 800. And which one is in the 100th spot?
4.
The 1, 2 places after my decimal, and the 1,000 spot, the 6. All right, so they review that with you because now we're going to do rounding. When you're rounding a number, there's really only 2 possible answers. What I would do is figure out my value up to the point I'm rounding it off to, and either it's got to stay that number or it could round up by 1, depending on if there's a 5 or higher after it. So if I'm rounding this to the nearest hundredth, I'm looking at my hundredth spot. So everything up to that point would be 74.31. I'm saying, do I leave it at that number or do I round it up by 1, which would be 74.32? I look at the number behind the 1. If it is 5 or higher, I'm going to round it up. If it's less than 5, I use my number that I had originally. In this case, the 74.31. Since it's a 2, I'm just going to leave it at 74.31. If I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, that means I'm rounding to the ones spot. In this case, there's a 9 there. So again, I could leave it a 9, but since there's a 7 behind it, I actually am going to round it up by 1. So my answer is going to be 10. So really when you're rounding, there's really only 2 possible things you could have. Do I leave it the same or do I round it up by 1? If I am going to round 49.78 to the nearest tenth, what would I give for my answer?
49.8.
49.8, exactly. So the 7's in my 10th spot. I'd look and say, okay, is it 49.7 or do I have to round it up? I have to round it up since there's an 8 there. Converting between percentages and whole numbers. Percent, the word per means out of. A cent is 100, right? There's 100 pennies in a dollar. So whenever we're working with percentages, we're working with 100. If I am going to take a decimal and write it as a percent, I'm multiplying by 100 and adding the percent sign. If I have the one with the percent and it says write it as a decimal, meaning get rid of the percent, I'm going to divide by 100 and get rid of the percent sign. When I multiply by 100, all I have to do is move my decimal 2 places to the right. You could use your calculator, but quick way, just move it over 2 places. 100 has 2 zeros. Our number system is powers of 10. So I would have 45.9%. If I want to get rid of the percent sign, I'm dividing by 100, which moves my decimal back or to the left 2 places. 12.028. Alex is kind of, I don't want to say picky, but in best form, you don't leave the 0 off of the front. You don't start with point. If you put it in that way, it will say it's correct. It'll just say it's correct, however, and remind you in best form the 0 goes in front. It's not wrong if you leave it off. So on number 14, if I want to remove my percent sign again, I'm going to divide by 100, and so what would I end up with? 0.0862, and just for fun, I'll put the 0 in front since that's how they like it. And if I have 0.5 and I want to change it to a percent, I'm going to multiply by 100. 0.5 is what percent? 50%, right? I move it 2 places to the right. Most of you probably already knew 0.5 was 50% anyway. All right, go ahead, try number 15 there. By the way, you will be able to use your notes, your binder on your assessments. So if you're taking good notes and adding extra things that you need to know, it's going to help you out on your final. First part of this, you may not need a whole lot of notes, but definitely when you get into the statistics stuff, you will probably want to have your notes. Number 15 then, if I'm going to write 0.069 as a percentage, what would I end up with? 6.9%, exactly. And multiplied by 100, move my decimal 2 to the right. And if I have 230% and I write it as a decimal, I end up with 2.30, or you can just drop the 0. 2.3 would be best form since we don't really need the 0 at the end. If I divide by 100, moved it back 2 places. Now on these ones they tell you that you're supposed to do it without a calculator. I don't care if you use a calculator or not, but in algebra, if I am translating this, the word is your equal sign, the word of is multiplying. So on these first ones, if I'm going to do 60% of 91, I'm just going to take 60% times 91. First of all, I need to change my percent to a decimal. 60% as a decimal would be 0.6 or 0.60, whichever way you want to write it. Of 91 means I'm going to take 0.6 times 91. If you want to multiply that on your calculator, go ahead. If you want to do it in your head or on your paper, more power to you. What did we end up when we multiplied that out? 54.6. Now when I work with percentages, I always like to think about what makes sense and what my baseline things are. So what I do is I look at my percent. 50% would be half. So 60% is a little over half of 91. Yes, that makes sense. If I would have said my answer was 546, hopefully I would know that's nowhere close, right? So 25% is a fourth, 50% is half, 75% is 3/4. Most of you can figure at least close to that in your head to give you an idea. So if I have 90% of something, I know my answer is going to be pretty close to 86 because 100% would be exactly 86. 90% again would be 0.9 or 0.90. Of means times, so if I take 0.9 times 86, I haven't done that in my head yet, what do you ended up with? 77.4. All right, go ahead then and do 80% of 54. That's what I got. So when you did 80% of 54, you got 43.2. 80%, 0.8 times your 54. Like I said, if you want to use your calculator, you can use your calculator. Alex thinks that you don't need it. Next one's here, converting a percent to a fraction. Sometimes it's easier to use a fraction. If you're using your calculator, it's probably not ever easier to use a fraction, but in some cases. Percent again means out of 100. So first thing they're going to do if I have a percentage, 80%, is just write it as a fraction as 80 out of 100, 80 over 100. Of course, we always want to have our fractions in simplest form, so we want to reduce it down. In this case, since they each have a 0, I could cancel out one of my zeros, which is really just dividing it by 10, right? So that gives me 8/10. And then, of course, I can reduce 8/10 down because both of those are divisible by 2. And so I get 4/5. If you happen to be using your calculator and you wanted to double check and make sure you did it right, just for those who aren't really used to using the fraction button on the calculator, if you hit 80 fraction 100 and hit equals, the calculator will simplify it for you. So if you put in 80 fraction 100, it should give you 4/5. 75% is a fraction then. Again, we would start off with 75 out of 100, since percent means out of 100, and simplify that fraction. If we simplify that fraction, we can divide both the top and the bottom by 25 would be the quickest way. 75 divided by 25 is 100 divided by 25 is 4. So 3/4 is the same thing as 75%. Go ahead and do number 21. So 84% as a fraction in simplest form, what did we end up with? 21/25. That's what I got. We would have started with 84 over 100, and I divided by 2 and divided by 2 again. Could have started with 4, but I didn't think of that. Converting a fraction to a percentage. These ones are all going to have nice denominators that divide evenly into 100. Normally, if I had a fraction and I was going to change it to a percent, I would take the top divided by the bottom and make it a decimal and then just move it over. But these ones are easy to do without using your well, I shouldn't say easy, but easier to do without using your calculator, because all of the denominators are ones that divide evenly into 100. 50 goes into 100 2 times, so I could just take 2 times my numerator there. 47 times 2 would give me something like 94, right? So 94 out of 100 means I have 94%. Now you could have, like I said, taken your calculator, taken 47 divided by 50, it's going to give you 0.94, and then changed it to a percent also. They're just trying to give you a little shortcut. So if I have 43 over 25 and I want to change it to a percent, 25 divides into 100 4 times. I get hand signals, that works. And then I'm going to take 43 times 4, and I get 172. That's what I got. So I have 172%. Right? When my numerator is bigger than my denominator and I have that improper fraction, I should have more than 100%. So go ahead and try number 24. Write that one as a percentage. And so 36 over 20 is what as a percentage? 108?
Oh no, 180.
180. Okay, I thought maybe I did it wrong. So I was doing it in my head. Okay, 180. How about that? That's what I got. 180%. Did everybody else get that? Yep, I see a few nods. All righty. And the last one's on this page, writing a ratio as a percentage without a calculator. If I'm thinking just basically about percents and I'm looking for what percent, I'm taking what I'm going to call the part divided by the total. The total they'll usually call the base. But in this case, Dion has ridden 18 miles of a bike course. The course is 30 miles long. What percent of the course did he ride so far? I would do 18 divided by 30. Now, since 30 doesn't go into 100 very nicely, I would use a calculator, even though it says without a calculator, because I don't want to have to do long division. So if you take 18 and you divide it by 30 for me, since I don't have a calculator in my hand, I could grab one, but 0.6. we get 0.6, and then we would change that to a percent. 0.6 as a percent is 60%, since we have to move the decimal twice or multiply it by 100, right? Amanda spent a total of $40 at the grocery store. Of this amount, she spent 22 on fruit. What percent did she spend? So if we're going to solve this, we would do what? 22 over 40. 22 is the part, 40 is my total, right? And again, I would just use my calculator unless you really like to do long division. Those two back there, they want to do long division. So if you take 22 and divide it by 40 for me, you get 55.55, which is 55%. Go ahead, do the last one there. Jessica got 44 votes out of the 55-member club. What percent of the votes did she end up getting? Question?
She got 80% of the vote.
80, all right. You already answered it for me. 80. Everybody knows how I got 80, right? All right. So those are the first, 9 or so things on your pie chart. Most of them you probably knew. And go ahead and look on Alex if you have any of those, you want to do those. Otherwise, what we want to work on is the guided reading and then the homework questions from the book. If you want to work together on those, more power to you. If you know what you're doing and you don't want to sit here for another hour, that's up to you, but I'll be here in case you've got questions. But by class time next week, Tuesday, you want to have that chapter 1 guided reading and questions done. And then we will finish the review and chapter 1 next week. Don't worry, it's going to get harder in a hurry.